Hey there, it's Cynthia with the Dinner Fix, where I help answer the question, what's for dinner? And what is for dinner? These are some interesting times that we're living in, which certainly lends a level of complexity to figuring out what to make on the regular. That's not to say we can't get a little creative in the kitchen. So what I'm going to be making today is a Cuban favorite of mine, picadillo. Now, picadillo is a pretty traditional Cuban dish made with typically chopped beef. We're going to be making it with ground beef today just because of the ease of being able to find it in the store, and also it just makes for a simple weeknight preparation when the meat's already chopped and ready to go. I'm going to be serving that alongside some steamed rice, and that's just a simple steamed white rice. I'm not going to be demoing that on this episode because I'm confident you know how to make white rice, and some black beans that I've also previously made. If you would like a recipe for making black beans from scratch, I will certainly provide that for you. Otherwise, you can use your own favorite recipe for cooking beans. They don't have to be black beans. That is just what's typically traditional in Cuban cuisine. But you could use any bean you like. You could use canned beans as well if you prefer. But enough of me talking. Let's get cooking. So I have here a pound of ground beef, to which I'm going to add a couple of things. I have here a tablespoon of water. I'm just going to pour that over. And then I'm going to add half a teaspoon of baking soda. And you may be thinking to yourself, like, what are you thinking adding baking soda to beef? Trust me. You may have seen me do this in other recipes if you subscribe, which I encourage you to do if you haven't already. But what baking soda does to meat is it actually helps tenderize it. So we're gonna just stir this in as you see me doing now. Oh, one more thing. I'm gonna add a half teaspoon of salt to this. See, I put it there so I wouldn't forget, and then I forgot. Anyway, we're just going to stir this in, and then we're going to set this aside for 20 minutes just to let the baking soda kind of do its thing. And then we'll kind of come back to this later, and I'll show you what we're going to do with it later on. Actually, let me add some fresh cracked black pepper to this. Good. It's about 1/4 teaspoon. All right, so again, I'm just gonna set that aside. Got a timer here that I've set for 20 minutes, and we're just gonna give that a go. All right, so we're gonna move on to the next step in our process, and the next step is to chop up some of the vegetables that are gonna go in our picadillo. Now, I have here, I'm gonna move this over. I have here just half a white onion and half a bell pepper, or roughly half a bell pepper. That I just happen to have. Traditionally, I think you see this recipe a lot using green onions. I like to use red onion for this because it lends a level of sweetness to the recipe that I really like. But if you have, a green bell pepper, by all means use that. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're just going to give this a really fine chop. We're just looking for about 1/4-inch pieces here. And I'm going to be doing the exact same thing to the onion. Now, if you have a food processor, you could certainly do this in a food processor. It's going to make for a quicker process. However, I find that it takes me longer to wash my food process. It's more work for me to use the food processor and wash it than it would be to just chop this because it is such a small quantity. So I'm just doing it by hand. Now, picadillo is derived from the Spanish word picado, which means chopped. So, we've got chopped meat, we've got chopped pepper, chopped onion. You get the idea. So really it's basically just the name of the dish tells you kind of what it consists of in one simple word. so that's that. Let's set this aside and let's get cooking. All right, so I have here a Dutch oven that I'm going to be using for this. Of course, you don't have to use a Dutch oven. If you have just like a soup pot, you can use that. I wouldn't do this in a skillet, although I suppose you could, but there is a lot of liquid that's going to go into this, so I would just recommend doing it in something with a little bit of depth to it, like this. So I'm just bringing that to heat over medium-high heat. To that, I'm going to add a tablespoon of vegetable oil. And as soon as this becomes hot, we're going to begin cooking these vegetables. So I'm just going to give that a second. While we wait for this to heat, actually, let me talk a little bit about some of the other flavors that are going to go into this dish. So I have here a couple of spices. I have some ground oregano. Well, not ground, some dry oregano, not ground. I did just kind of crush it between my palms to break up the bigger pieces. I have some cumin, and that's ground. And then I have some ground cinnamon. And you may be thinking like beef ground cinnamon, like Cynthia, what are you thinking? It's actually really good. Trust me on this one. It lends a really warm, just delicious flavor to the dish. I know typically you think like cinnamon and pumpkin pie, or cinnamon and, snickerdoodles, or all these other delicious things that we add cinnamon to that are sweet, but it's actually not that uncommon to find cinnamon in savory cooking. You actually see it a lot in North African cooking, particularly in Morocco. And it lends a really just warm, delicious flavor. It complements the beef really well. So don't be afraid to use it. And it's really critical for this recipe, so don't leave it out. All right, so this is about shimmering at this point. So we're going to very carefully, this is a big cutting board, add our veg to the pot. Although in hindsight, I shouldn't have chopped this on the side with the well on it, because now my vegetables are getting stuck in the well. So let's just use my hands. If you have a bench scraper, you can use that too. But your hands will work just as well. You could also use the back of a knife. You never want to scrape with the front of your knife because that's going to dull your blade, but I can certainly use the back of the knife to pick up any little stragglers that may have fallen behind. All right. And we're going to add all those spices that I just talked about. And a 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. And we're just going to give this a stir. And we're going to cook this. Oh, that smells so good already. Like, again, with the cinnamon, it doesn't seem right if you've never cooked savory food with cinnamon, but you're just going to have to take my word for it on this one until you've tried it. Like, it already just smells amazing. Like cinnamon and peppers and onions. So good. So again, we're just going to give this a stir pretty constantly. We don't want any of those spices to burn. This is going to take about 6 minutes. In the meantime, we're going to chop up some garlic, and still keeping an eye on that. So you're going to have to do 2 things at once here. And if you can't do that, then you're going to want to chop this garlic up in advance when you're making this at home. But I have here 3 cloves of garlic that I'm going to peel and just mince, if I can get them separated. There are a few things as satisfying as giving a clove of garlic a good whack. Really good way to blow off some steam. All right, and again, just, oops, got a little piece of paper in there. Don't want that. Just keeping an eye on this. So at this point, I'm just going to add my garlic. As you can see, the vegetables have kind of softened. They're actually on the brink of starting to brown. So it's time for the next step. All right, and we're going to just continue to stir this after adding the garlic for 30 seconds. And we want to stir this constantly because this garlic will burn if left to its own devices. All right, so it's been about 30 seconds. I have here some dry white wine. This is just a Chardonnay. We're going to add that in. That's going to help deglaze the pot or scrape up that fond that's developed on the bottom. And then I have here half a can of diced tomato. We're going to add that as well. We're going to stir this. Again, just kind of scraping up the fond that's formed on the bottom, all those little brown bits, because that's just going to lend a really yummy flavor to the finished dish. And we're going to let this cook for about 5 minutes until this starts to dry up. Now I know I'm kind of cooking with a lot of halves today, right? We've got half a bell pepper, half an onion, half a can of tomatoes, and you're wondering, well, what am I supposed to do with all the other halves, right, that are getting left behind? Make pizza. You can take that half a can of sauce, or of tomatoes rather, that's remaining. You can blend that up in a blender, cook that down with a little sauteed garlic and olive oil, add some oregano, some salt. If you have tomato paste, a little bit of tomato paste to add complexity to the flavor, and you've got sauce. Then you can dice up the rest of that bell pepper, slice up some onion, top a pizza. If you don't have crust on hand, or you don't know how to make it, or don't want to go to the trouble of making it, one thing I do too sometimes when I'm feeling super lazy is, no judgment, I'm just saying some days I really don't want to cook at all. I'll make pizza bread. So I'll take, like, if I have a baguette or just a crusty kind of hearty piece of bread. I'll sometimes even do it with really thick slices of sourdough. I will top them with, sauce, cheese, toppings, stick it under the broiler, and just let it cook till it's nice and bubbly. And that makes for like a 5-minute dinner or lunch. We're spending a lot of time at home these days, so it makes for something really quick that you can make, and if you're cooking for little ones, that they're going to enjoy. So, there's no reason why half of anything should go to waste. You just, use a little creativity to figure out what else you can do with it. All right, so as you can see, this has just about dried up. The juice from the tomatoes and from the wine that we were cooking earlier has just about been absorbed. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to add some, this is chicken broth. If you have beef broth, certainly use that. I just had some chicken broth on hand. Again, it's kind of hard to find some things these days. And then to that, I'm going to add 2 bay leaves. And I have here a 1/4 cup of raisins. These are golden raisins. You could use just, regular, like the black raisins. I just prefer the taste of these, but if you have the others, that's perfectly fine. And then we're 40 seconds away from that beef hitting that 20-minute mark. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to take the beef in, like, I don't know, maybe 2-inch chunks and just drop it into the pot. And this doesn't have to be perfect. We are going to break this up. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to accomplish that by handling the meat as little as possible. That's going to ensure that it remains tender. So again, just kind of dropping this into the pot in 2-inch chunks. And there goes that timer. There we are. Now I'm going to drop the heat to medium low. I'm going to clamp a lid on this bad boy. And then we're going to cook this for 10 minutes until the meat is cooked through. And what we're going to do, actually, I'm going to set the timer before I forget. What we're going to do is occasionally we're going to take a peek under the lid and we're going to take 2 forks and just kind of break the meat up. But we don't want to over stir this to toughen up the meat. So I'm just going to give that like a minute or 2 to start cooking, and then I'm going to take a peek and I'll kind of show you how I break that down. All right, so we are about 4 minutes into our cooking time, and as you can see, the meat has started to brown. I'm just going to take these 2 forks and I'm just going to gently kind of pull this apart. Wanted to distribute those bay leaves. They were both kind of crowded in one corner. So again, just very gently kind of breaking this up. I'll check this again in a few minutes. Put the lid back on. All right, now in the meantime, let's prepare another one of the ingredients for this dish that's pretty traditional. We have here a 1/4 cup of pimento stuffed green olives that we're going to just coarsely chop. These are going to get stirred into the meat once it's finished cooking. And this is going to lend just a briny, kind of salty taste that is pretty essential to this dish. So gonna give those again that a coarse chop. These don't need to be finely chopped. All right, that's pretty good. Just gonna stick these back in the bowl. Let's take another peek under here. Again, just breaking this apart. We don't want meatballs. We want a pretty uniform texture throughout, or uniform size kind of bits of meat throughout. But we don't want to do this, right? Because that's going to negate the effort of the baking soda that we put in at the onset of this. Let me just turn this down. All right, rice is cooking. Rice is cooking. Now, if you can't get your hands on ground beef, you can certainly do this with pork. I've seen recipes that that call for pork. You can make this even like half pork, half beef. But, you know, just kind of work with what you can get your hands on. All right, and there are about 2 minutes, just over 2 minutes left on this. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of cleaning up, and then we'll kind of finish this up. All right, there goes our timer. So let's take a peek under here. All right. The beef is cooked through. It's pretty consistent. Again, in kind of the size of the chunks of beef. You're just going to give this a stir. Those raisins have plumped up really nicely too. Smells really, really tasty. All right, so we're going to fish out those bay leaves. We don't want those anymore. They've done their job. So we're going to get rid of those. And then we're going to add our chopped olives. And we're going to add a tablespoon of red wine vinegar. And what this is going to do is it's going to add, well, along with kind of the brine that the olives are sitting in or soaking in, it's going to lend a brightness to this dish because you do have, you know, kind of a lot of meat, and it's, you know, fatty and heavy, and the brightness from that acidity helps cut through all of that and just make it more palatable and balanced. All right, so we're going to increase the heat here to medium high, And we're gonna cook this for about 5 minutes. Until a lot of this liquid, see there's still quite a bit of liquid here, until this is kind of cooked down and the liquid kind of starts to thicken up and coat the meat. So again, that's gonna take about 5 minutes on a medium-high heat. All right, so as you can see, the pot started to dry up. The liquid that's in here has really thickened up and it's coating the meat nicely at this point. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna turn that off the heat, and this is done. All right, let me clamp a lid on this. Actually, maybe not. Let's do that. And I'm just gonna move this to the back burner. And let me show you how I plate it. And now for my favorite part of every show, time to eat. Now, let me show you how I plate this. Now, of course, you can plate this however you want. If you just want to do this even with rice and you don't want to go to the hassle of making beans or plantains, don't. But if you were coming over to my house and I were making this, this is how I would be serving it. So I have here just a little amount of rice, to which I'm going to add, actually I'm not going to add the meat. You could, but I'm not going to. I'm going to add our beans. This is the way I typically see this plated when I go to Cuban restaurants. The beans and the rice are kind of hand in hand, or go hand in hand, and I'm just adding a little bit of that juice. And I'm going to add, oh, this is so good. I'm going to add some of our yummy picadillo. This is thickened up really nicely, actually, as it's cooled down a little bit. So it's almost like a little gravy. It's got a little gravy action going. Let me make sure I get a raisin. A couple of raisins in there. All right. And then we have, of course, our delicious plantains. Now, if you want to see how I make these, stay tuned. There's some bonus footage after this for those of you that want to see how I make the plantains. All right. Yum, yum, yum. All right, so we have, again, our delicious plantains, our beans, rice that I made previously. I'll provide a recipe for the beans, and rice is just plain steamed white rice. And of course we have that picadillo. Enough talking, right? Because I know that's what you're thinking, because that's what I'm thinking. Let's dig in. All right, so I'm gonna get a little beef, a little raisin, actually a little bit of everything but the plantain. I haven't been to Cuba, but I've been to some pretty good Cuban restaurants, and this is on point. Of course, I gotta get me some of this plantain. That moment when you realize you should have taken a smaller bite, but that was too good not to take a massive bite of it. This is absolutely delicious. I certainly encourage you to make this one at home. Please, comment, like, subscribe. There's a little bell up there somewhere in one of those corners. If you click on that, you'll be notified every time I upload new content. So I thank you for watching. Please make this at home. Let me know what you think, and I will see you, or rather you'll see me next time. Enjoy. All right, so for those of you that want to make the plantains to accompany this dish, this is how I make them. I have here a just medium-sized skillet. I've melted about a tablespoon of salted butter on like a low heat, medium low heat. And I have here a plantain. This may look like it's way past its due date or its prime, but this is exactly what you're looking for. The thing with plantains is I guess the more beat up and kind of bruised and dark they look, the sweeter they're going to be. And what I'm really looking for when I'm eating this dish is actually a sweet counterbalance to all of the savory flavors that are going on in the meat, in the beans that I'm going to be serving with it, and, I guess the rice, which I do cook in chicken broth. So there is an element of savoriness, even though, typically rice is a pretty neutral flavor. So I'm just going to cut off before my butter starts to brown. I'm talking way too much and not moving fast enough. So I just cut off the edges. I slit down the length of it, and then I'm just going to peel this back, and you'll see it looks not unlike a banana. And it's a more starchy type of banana. And I'm just cutting this into like 3/4 inch-ish pieces, and I'm actually going to start putting these on the skillet because I need to drop the heat in here. That butter sat there too long. It's going to be delicious, don't get me wrong, but if I'm not careful, I'm going to end up burning this butter before I even get a chance to use it. So I'm just adding those now. And I'm kind of debating whether I just want to do one plantain for this. I mean, one plantain is certainly enough for 2 people if you're cooking for 2, but I love me some plantains. I could eat that whole plantain by myself with this dish, but maybe I'll save that other plantain for breakfast. They're actually really good steamed. When I studied abroad in Brazil once upon a very long time ago, and my host mother would make them, or I guess she showed me how to make them, and then I make them myself, but you basically can steam plantains and then put a little dollop of butter and drizzle them with honey and a little sprinkle of salt. Oh man, it is delicious. So what we're looking for here is, I was going to try and use my hand, and then I thought better of it. We're just looking for these to get nice and golden. Oh, perfect. See that nice golden color? That is exactly what we're looking for. Actually, you can't see because my other camera is acting up, so let me see if I can show you. But that is what you are looking for. Nice and golden, not burnt. So you want to keep an eye on these. It's going to take, depending on how ripe your plantain is, it can take anywhere from, a minute or 2 to a couple of minutes if you're buying this. If this is still green when you buy it, probably not going to, actually I wouldn't even recommend using it for this. If you're buying a plantain that's still very green, I would just recommend sitting on it for a couple of days. So I guess a couple of things, and I apologize for being all over the place, but when you go to the store to buy a plantain, if you're finding that there are really just kind of green plantains, it's okay, buy them, but you're going to want to let them sit on your counter for a couple of days before you use them. Otherwise, you're going to end up with something that would be probably better put to making like a mash, kind of like a sweet potato mash or mashed potato, that you could serve alongside something else, and it's going to be delicious, but it's not going to have the level of sweetness that we're looking for this preparation method in particular. So yeah, just make sure they're nice and black. But anyway, the whole reason I brought this up, and again, I'm sorry I'm all over the place today, is the riper this is, the sweeter it is, the higher the sugar content, the faster it's going to burn. It took me a very long time to make that point. But yeah, you just want to keep an eye on these and make sure that they're not burning. And if you have to rotate them, if there are hot spots on your pan, by all means, kind of shift these around to ensure that they don't burn. So let me see if I can show you this. So they're nice and kind of toasted throughout. And these are done.